Hello and welcome to a Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings battle report. This is game 2 of our practice day for the upcoming World Series event happening in CanCon at January 2024. I'm playing Spires against Dweghom and the scenario is Echelon. Those are our armies, or selections of our armies on screen there. Tom's wonderfully painted Dweghom, as always, are an absolute treat. That green flame is just incredible. And you can see I'm finally getting some Spires together. You can see them there on the picture. I'm really happy with them. I've posted some pictures of the more legal models. Obviously, there are a lot of conversions here. There are some 3D prints. I will not be taking many of these to CanCon, but I am really enjoying the painting project, and I hope you like them. First, let's look at the lists, and then move on into the game. So this is my Spires list. I've done a full breakdown of this list in the previous video from today. So if you want to have a look at my thoughts behind how this list is structured and why I've taken certain things, you can find all of that in the Spires versus City-States video that basically was previously published. However, in short, what we have is a tooled up high clone executor built for all of the shooting in a unit of Vanguard clone infiltrators, a basic unit of force grown drones just as necessary mainstay, a high clone executor with Aura of Death 4 to his regiment hanging out in a unit of 8 force grown drones, 4 Marksman Clones, a Warlord Avatar Projection Pheromancer in a unit of 4 brute drones, unit of 3 brute drones, 2 units of 3 Stryx, a completely naked Pheromancer in a unit of force-grown drones, and a unit of 3 brute drones. This list has, I think, 14 activations, which is on the high side for Conquest. You can get higher with like full Goblin mode, 100 Kingdoms lists, but this is about where Spires tops out if you still want a reasonable degree of force. I've gone to 15 activations in some Under Spire lists, but physically sourcing those models for CanCon is non-practical, and also the diminishing returns begin to kick in relatively quickly. As I covered in the last video, the list is built around early board presence and incredibly early scenario aggression. In particular, the mainstay of that is the 2 high clone executors, each in light regiments, which give me scoring regiments on the board very, very early, and they are useful and powerful scoring regiments to boot. Okay, let's have a look at the Dweghom. So this is my opponent, Tom's Dweghom. Tom, in addition to being our Vanguard and an absolutely wonderful human being, is also definitely the best local Dweghom player. We have, I think, 3 Dweghom players, but a couple of them are learning. Tom, on the other hand, knows his business. He's a long-time wargamer, and this list kind of reflects that. There is one piece of quite experimental tech in this list, which we will get to, but all of the rest is solid AF. So we have a Magma Sorcerer with the Graft of Fire, riding a Hellbringer Drake, and a unit of Fireforged. Now, this is just as a point, it is very interesting to see as there's like this slow balancing of Dweghom happening. I think they're in a very good state right now, and you can tell they're in a very good state because it's a serious choice now between Fire and Magma as the 2 sort of like primary schools for your Tempered Sorcerers. The Tempered Creed is still, generally speaking, the best creed, pretty comfortably still just about outstripping the Ardent Creed, and comfortably outstripping the lol you don't have a creed that you get by taking the hold reg as the Warlord, should you wish to take a Warlord that downgrades your entire army for no reason. So obviously that like the choices for Warlord inside Dweghom at the moment are the competitive choices are Tempered Sorcerer and quite probably Tempered Steel Shaper. You can definitely make a very solid list that is led by an Ardent. You cannot make a solid Dweghom list that has a Warlord hold reg. Hold regs are very solid, and I like them a lot, just don't ever make them your Warlord, as the rules are currently written, time of recording, December 2023. Anyway, so we have a Magma Sorcerer, and the point I was making was that it's very interesting how Magma and Fire are both very valid choices for spells, and I think I actually prefer 2 Magma Sorcerers, just barely, over any Fire Sorcerers. I think if you take Fire Sorcerers, you want to take advantage of the Herald of Fire synergy. That is really, really cool. But there's just this, like, reliable usefulness, like, that you always get something good, like a bunch of tokens and plenty of damage out of a dual Magma Sorcerer setup. You can roll 2 successes and still inflict 5 AP1 hits in the flank, and you can set that up by having your Warlord yeet out a eruption zone or make terrain erupting, and I think that's very cool. In this list, however, Tom is doing 1 Magma Sorcerer and 1 Stone Sorcerer. Now, Stone Sorcerers can be backbreaking, where the specific spell is they have 2 spells that are not very useful, but which will generate you some tempered tokens. And then they have, I think it's called Roots of Stone. Actually, so they've got a spell that gives Tenacious. That's really cool. But anyway, they can give a unit that has not activated, +2 defense at the cost of making that unit unable to reform, withdraw, march, or charge. You can use that offensively or defensively, and in both cases, it's potentially backbreaking. +2 defense is obviously really, really high, and completely preventing a unit from moving at all is very, very strong offensively. And that's really cool. It's just that it's 10-inch range, and making it work offensively needs you to target a unit that hasn't activated, and making it work defensively needs you to target a unit that hasn't activated. But if you didn't have to target units that hadn't activated, it would be absolutely ball breaking because you could aggressively push things and then buff them. So I get why Stone is the way that it is, but it is easily the most temperamental spell school, and if this was just a Magma Sorcerer instead, it would be very easy to use. Tom has chosen hard mode, and although it will matter in this game, I think it's just, I would probably play Magma, although I think the Sorcerer choice is bold. Otherwise, the list consists of Hold Ballistae, Fireforged, Inferno Automata, and Inferno Automata. That's going to be very relevant this game. So in the previous game, if you look at the previous video, you'll have seen that city-states really struggle to exert any kind of early pressure that didn't see their early game regiments getting run off the field by Spire's early aggression. This list absolutely can counter Spire's early aggression, with Ballistae and Inferno Automata, and then being followed by Fireforged and the Hellbringer. This list can push units forward and keep them alive with tokens, and then fight my light regiments. So I have to be much more careful this game because Tom has fast, dangerous shooting, etc. light presence on the board that can fight with mine. My worst case scenario, for example, is that my very, very expensive Vanguard clone regiment just like a unit of Inferno Automata runs to hug it, and then I take 6 Aura of Death hits and a whole bunch of impact hits, and they just explode for nothing. So the early game presence here is quite strong. 2 units of Fireforge is also plenty of shooting, and then we have, and the Hellbringer Drake obviously is plenty of shooting. So this is a very, very gunliney list in that respect. And then we have our melee taken care of basically by the Hold Reg. So he has Dweghom for Cleave 3, in addition just to his fairly good combat stats, a unit of Thanes with a Standard Bearer and the Magma Herald. The Magma Herald will interact with the Tempered Sorcerer and give the regiment Aura of Death. I think you could probably get rid of it in this list if you needed to, but Tom has the points spare here. There's nothing else that he really needs to do in terms of upgrades. And then we have an Ironclad Drake. I am increasingly super respecting the Ironclad Drake. Tom is still painting his, and so the current one in this battle report will be a dinosaur instead. But the Ironclad Drake, like, I like and fear Dragon Slayers. They are a cool regiment. The Ironclad Drake is more well-rounded in a bunch of ways that just make it that it just always will perform. It has impact attacks, it's faster, it's cheaper because you have to pay a lot of points for Unstoppable on the Dragon Slayers, whereas the Ironclad is natively Unstoppable. And rather than being Cleave 3, it's Cleave 2, Terror 2, which makes it sort of just generally better. It's not over-specialized with that like Omega Cleave, and instead it will almost always be able to do damage to everything. It's just a very good, very fast. It has all of the advantages of being a monster. I like the Ironclad Drake a lot. So this list is rolling in at 11 activations, relatively healthy count. That's kind of like a good normal number, 10 or 11 for most lists. It's got a ton of spellcasting, a ton of ranged attacks, some quite solid melee. It's just broadly a well-rounded Dweghom list that is doing exactly one experimental thing, which is the inclusion of a stone rather than Magma Sorcerer or any Fire Sorcerers. Alright, let's move on to the game. So here we are playing Echelon. In this table we have 4 forests, which we're playing as hindering, obstructing, and obscuring, as in the previous scenario. We have 2 pieces of impassable garrison terrain, capacity 4, but no one is going to go into them. And we have 1 piece of water. This piece of water in the center of the table is not ever going to impact anything's clash, but it's going to be very relevant because a Dweghom Sorcerer is going to spend most of the game boiling it into an erupting terrain piece and using it to huck eruptions out of. Echelon is a starkly contrasting scenario for my list compared to Breakout, which I just played. Breakout is like Maelstrom. It is very amenable to early pressure. You can contest both side zones with this list. You can get some points on the board early. Your opponent's light regiments, you can kind of use the fact that those zones are on the side to protect your flank. None of that applies in echelon. So in echelon, you have two zones. One is close, one is far. And if you move far enough across the table to contest the far, to take the far zone, there's a very good chance that your opponent can respond easily and punish you for that. Likewise, the near zone is very easy for like almost anyone to get points onto, usually at least by turn 3, but sometimes as quickly as turn 2. You don't have to be that fast to get onto the near zone in the early game. So the fact that I'm bringing on a light scoring unit early is just like not as relevant. And then there are these objectives everywhere, and my list is actually not very good at killing objectives. It has no heavies, and it does not want to be using its range units to fight objectives. It wants to be using them to fight the enemy. So when you combine the fact that the scenario is much less amenable to how my list is playing, with the fact that my opponent is much better equipped to deal with my list, this game proved to be a challenge. In terms of reinforcements, Tom has brought on one unit of Inferno Automata and then the Sorcerer in the Ballistae. They've just moved up. They will be working on this objective, just sort of chilling out. They just want to exert enough of a threat in this area that I don't get too bold, and deal with this objective to get some early points on the board. The main purpose here is that the Stone Sorcerer is going to be casting some random spell every turn for multiple turns, slowly ticking up the tempered counters. I have brought on my Force-Grown drones with High Clone Executor to contest this area. I've given him a little pocket Pheromancer. This is the Pheromancer in the Force-Grown drones. The Infiltrators have moved on kind of in the center, but they are thinking about making a cheeky run onto this objective. They just didn't really want to have anything to do with these Inferno Automata at this point, and because I've identified this zone maybe just for one turn of scoring as a way to get ahead on the scenario, I've moved the Stryx forward because I use Stryx to support my High Clone in Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. So no scoring on this turn. Units have begun to turn up. Let's move on to turn 2. So turn 2, and things are already beginning to get messy. One of the things that has happened this turn, one of the things I've noticed this turn, is the units that I'm moving forward having Disperse. That didn't matter at all last game. It's mattering a lot this game. So we've got a unit of Vanguard Clone Infiltrators with Disperse, a unit of Force-Grown Drones with Disperse. That is keeping the potential damage from Dweghom shooting and from Dweghom magic down. Not to nothing, but it means, for example, that Eruption is only doing 3 hits rather than 5. And when I'm at Evasion 2 on the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, and I'm rerolling Resolve rolls because of the nearby Warlord when he turns up over here, that actually goes a really long way in just keeping the worst of the early damage down, which I'm really liking. So I have made the end of round push that I expected to make. The very last activation this turn ended up being the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, just popping onto this zone here. Between it and these guys, I'm able to get a scenario lead this turn by claiming both zones, which is worth quite a lot in Echelon. For his part, Tom has had a round spent trying to destroy the objective, and so this picture here was taken at an activation into a couple of activations into round 2, so just ignore that. At the end of this round, this objective was still here. He wasn't able to kill it, but he put some shots into it with the Ballistae and charged it with the Inferno Automata. Just didn't get the impact hits to do any damage. So it's 1 damage from the Ballistae shot, 1 damage from the Inferno Automata clash. I see that so there are Stryx there, and they were not visible. That's hilarious. Sorry. On the last turn, there were Stryx perfectly positioned behind this tower. That's kind of funny, but I guess. No, I see. Sorry. Here's what we missed. At the end of this round, these Stryx are here. That's what happened. Okay. Game state restored. So these Stryx that are here, no, at the end of this round, they're actually going to be here. Stryx have turned up. Stryx over here so these Inferno Automata have moved forward to screen out the Fireforged. Late in the round, I've run the Stryx around to engage them so again, you use your Stryx to support your Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. These guys turned up onto the battlefield. Like, I was able to see where they went before I committed any positioning. I still wanted to score this zone, which means that I moved up the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators and I shot them and I killed one of them. But then because I didn't want the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators to immediately have these guys run to engage them, the Stryx that were here then made that trip. They made that trip around into the flank. That's a March charge, but the March charge locks them down for at least some time, which means that the Vanguard Clone Infiltrators will be clear to make a run for it next turn. My Warlord has arrived, and importantly, this is the Pheromancer over here. positioning that 12-inch bubble to protect both of these guys, just so they can reroll resolve checks. My Marksman Clones have marched forward. They didn't really have range to anything, so this is just a march. We've had some more drones move on over here, and I think I only made 2 medium reinforcement rolls, but that's a fairly normal number, so that's totally fine. Marksman Clones getting ready to set up this firing battery. The Marksman Clones I'm finding always work best when you support the Force-Grown drones with them, just because the Force-Grown drones can be relied on to like survive kind of long enough most of the time. And if you put the Marksman Clones behind brute drones and your opponent has brutes, you still need to arcing fire, giving up, +1 volley to take those shots. Whereas if your opponent has brutes and you are put them behind the Force-Grown drones, then you're often able to take just clear shots, and that makes a big difference. That's a 50% damage increase on Marksman Clones when you do that. So at the end of this round, I've been able to secure these 2 zones at the cost of some significant overextension. We've got Stryx that have moved up to here. We've got these Stryx that have run into melee because I'm doing that to protect these Vanguard clone infiltrators. And we don't yet have that much heavy pressure on the board, but we are up. I think we go to 6 points on this round. So having now remembered what happened and the fact that this photo was taken and activation into the previous round, what went down here? Okay, we have the Stryx charge. So these Stryx that had moved up to here make this charge into the Inferno Automata, and between that and some Marksman Clone Volley will actually do some damage, and they're going to survive the turn surprisingly well. These Stryx over here they die, completely unsurprisingly, but they take the Inferno Automata down with them. There is actually an interaction here that caused poor Tom no end of grief. Now, regeneration is a very fickle rule. The thing about regeneration is that if you are broken, it's going to have no effect because you can't heal while you're broken. So when you are fighting something with Aura of Death, if you have regeneration, there's a very binary outcome where if you activate and the Aura of Death breaks you, well, that sucks for you, but if it doesn't break you, then your regeneration can kind of just heal all of the damage. And when you have Stryx, who have lethal demise, that's really bad for Inferno Automata, because they activate. In this case, I took 2 Aura of Death hits, I failed both of them, doesn't cause resolve checks. The 2 wounds did, I think, 3 wounds to the Inferno Automata after accounting for resolve, then I healed the damage, which is just like, delights me, but does absolutely not delight Tom, and I don't blame him. Ultimately, the Inferno Automata on this flank are going to be destroyed by a combination of the Infiltrators and the Stryx, and you can see that this unit of Infiltrators has skedaddled, and quite reasonably. They take some shots from the Drake, they lose, I think, a stand from a combination of the Drake's firepower and Eruption, and I will count my blessings that that's all they took. Disperse is getting me through really nicely there. And what I have done is I have run the Warlord's brute drones forward. This is potentially an overextension. There's a lot of guns pointing at them, but I wanted to keep those VCI alive, and so I run them forward and I run the VCI. Basically, the VCI are going to turn around and walk 6 inches backwards after shooting the last of the Inferno Automata to death, and then the brute drones are going to run over the top and shield them. Otherwise, using my reinforcement lines, brute drones have arrived here, brute drones have arrived here. These Force-Grown drones have done some damage, just 1 damage to this objective. And I'm just continuing to sort of like push forward in this space here. The Marksman Clones take a volley into something, don't remember what it was. They might have been the ones that actually finished off the Inferno. Oh yeah, they did. They finished off the Inferno Automata. They did like the last wound to that regiment. And the Thanes have arrived over here. The Ironclad Drake has arrived over here. So this is probably the most fragile point of the game. Because of Tom's early elements, I don't have a significant attrition advantage. I've killed some Inferno Automata, and I've lost slightly fewer points in Stryx, but it's like pretty even when you account for the VCI casualties. And Tom's heavies have both arrived. And the fact that Tom's heavies have both arrived, like heavies are innately more efficient. I can't, like, the cost of that Ironclad Drake and those Thanes, they're going to beat pound for pound anything in my army, and they're on the table now. So I haven't opened a wide attrition gap that will then let me concentrate force against them. But I do have a scenario lead. I'm up like a couple of points, and I'm up a couple of points after Tom has destroyed the objective over here, and I have some options to delay and deny. But a lot is resting on these 4 brute drones who have like every gun in the world pointing at them. So at the end of this round, Tom scores this zone, I score this zone, Tom destroys this objective. I think I'm 1 point ahead or something like that at this point in the scenario. The score is something like, I want to say 5 to 8. And we are staring down the barrel of a fragile engagement at this point. So, as we roll through, I think this is turn 4, you will note that a notable kill has been made. The Hellbringer Drake is down, and this is something that Spires can do. Now, over in the center, so in the center here, this Pheromancer is within 10 inches of this Drake. This Pheromancer is heavily exposed. The Drake can shoot, he can put magma, then the Drake has a rider, so that's more ranged attack. Spells can hit me, and we have these Fireforged here and these Fireforged here, and all of this is very efficient shooting. We're only defense 3 on the brute drones, and although they have excellent resolve, they have resolve 4 plus unit size plus oblivious plus the Pheromancer reroll. They're just defense 3 with some wounds, and what that means is that AP2 shooting goes through them like butter. I have moved this Pheromancer over here has moved like up and then sideways. I think he actually moved and then reformed in order to get inside 12 inches of these guys, hoping to heal them later in the turn. The challenge is I've stuffed my ordering up here, and what I do, so things are moving forward, things are going to be fine, we're just going to have to take our lumps here, is the plan for this turn, and try and bring down this Drake. The problem is, what I do is I activate this Pheromancer first, just to stick the -1 defense on this Drake, and he heals the VCI. And that's fine. But then, like, everything, not only does the Drake activate and, like, blow up a bunch of these guys, that destruction puts this unit outside of 12. And because this Pheromancer is now outside of 12, when I go to do a Pheromancy and try and heal these guys or give them Tenacious, I can't. If I had given them Tenacious, if like the first activation had just been to give them Tenacious, I didn't realistically risk the death of the Vanguard clone Infiltrators because no one thing is going to kill them, Disperse will carry them through. But because I took casualties, I took enough casualties on the brute drones to like force a casualty. I think I took 10 wounds exactly. 10 wounds takes me out of range of this Pheromancer. And so that's cost me 4 more wounds on the regiment, which means that these guys basically, I had hoped to be aggressive with them. They just pull backwards. They just rally and pull back. Like, they get shot by everything. I'm able to do a tiny little bit of healing. But I think they end the turn, like, broken again, with, like, just a few dudes left. They're not dead, which is good, but they're in rough shape. But that sacrifice, right, losing a whole bunch of them, has let me stick -1 defense on the Drake, and then light it up with the now fully regenerated unit of Vanguard clone Infiltrators who can aim and shoot. And I have to shuffle like a little bit sideways with these guys to get them all in, but I get a full volley with these guys as well. And because the Drake is size 3, between those two things, basically, that takes it off the table. That is a lot of shooting that is all concentrated against a model whose defense is reduced to 2. And like, this is how this list deals with Tauntors and like Death Star style regiments, is you just get a Pheromancer inside 10 and you suck the defense off of them, and then you shoot them with everything and hit them with Aura of Death. And like, this whole list has 2 models with cleave attacks. It's got 2 characters that can do a little bit of, or 3, sorry, technically. It's got 3 things with cleave, 3 stands in the entire army with cleave, and 1 stand with deadly shot. But because it has 2 Pheromancers, if you just mark a target and drop its defense by 1, you start hitting it with a million just vanilla hits. And the thing about vanilla hits is that there are very few rules that interact with them. Hardened doesn't matter. Like, you just take the -1 defense, you suck the oxygen out of things' lungs, and then you shoot them with everything. You hit them with everything, you hit them with brutes, etc. The challenge, obviously, is getting your, like, squishy, important, critically, like, Pheromancers inside range. And that results in their death or risk, and in this case, the Warlord came very close to biting it. Otherwise, we are being kind of non-committal with everything except for the Force-grown drones, which I feel okay chucking into the breach once the Drake is dead. Frankly, I was comfortable doing these guys early. The important thing is, like, these poor Inferno Automata are having an absolute time of it. They're really struggling to kill these Stryx because that same interaction keeps happening, where the Stryx activated early in the round, they took 2 Aura of Death hits, So 4 Aura of Death hits. I think they took 3 wounds, regenerated it all back, then Inspired, clashed, and like that actually just makes them more dangerous. So these Inferno Automata are having a terrible time of it. The Ballistae get engaged by the Force-Grown drones, but in this case, Tom makes use of the +2 defense spell, because the Ballistae haven't activated yet, to like basically render. I think he takes like almost no damage from Aura of Death, because of course he does, because his defense is 5. The Thanes actually end up deciding, they think about taking this fight, but they end up deciding just to reform and move up and forward, and so I'm just very non-committal with the Brutes. And the Marks, like basically, this fight I just don't want to have right now. Over here, happy for this to happen, even if I take a full volley from the Fireforged into the drones. The drones have loose formation. It's going to suck, but like, we'll manage. Otherwise, these Force-Grown drones have abandoned beating this objective to run forward to try and push back the Ironclad Drake, which goes for a charge. I think it's like a 4+, which I think it has unstoppable natively, which is a 75% chance. It whiffed it. And so I just sort of like, I chill out here, and he chills out here. So once again, Tom scores this zone, I score this zone. We are, I think, with the Sorcerer dead, that is a tipping point. And in fact, it's going to be a tipping point. There's one thing we have left to do, or there are 2 primary objectives. There are 3 primary objectives left to secure this game. The first is that we have to deal with the Ironclad Drake somehow. It doesn't really matter how, we just have to deal with it somehow. We have to delay the Thanes. We might never kill them, but we have to hold them out from making a decisive push on this objective. And then we need to reconstitute the Brute Drone so that they can be an effective fighting force. And if we can do at least 2 of those 3, we're probably in good shape. The scenario is just continuing to tick over, but we will fall behind if Tom successfully gets onto this objective. So moving into, yes, this is turn 4, we can see that the Drake has fallen. So what has happened this turn? A big thing that happened early on is that these Stryx activated. They took 2 wounds from Aura of Death. Those 2 wounds killed off the remaining Inferno Automata, which allowed them to reform and charge into the unit of Thanes, and then the Thanes failed to kill the Stryx, which is like, absolutely perfect. That's what I want. I want to keep those Thanes in combat for as long as possible, and for that reason, these Brute Drones have moved forward, just not to. They are not taking into combat. Everything that's happening on this flank is just to keep these Thanes from reaching this position for as long as possible. The Force-Grown drones with Aura of Death have continued to just whiffle bat ineffectually forever against the Defense 5 Ballistae. One funny thing that happened is that I challenged his Sorcerer to a duel, and he accepted, and he nearly beat my High Clone to death. He spent a bunch of tokens to score auto hits, which came very close to killing me. So I'm not going to do that again. Lesson learned. One of the weaknesses of how I have configured this Force-Grown drone brick is that the High Clone is not durable. He's defense 2 with 4 wounds. Good resolve, but like, those aren't good stats. And an alternate way to run this list, if you don't run the Vanguard clone Infiltrators, is that you put additional neural receptors and adaptive evolution and the ablative flesh, whatever it is, and you make that High Clone actually able to fight a duel. Because over the course of the game, his defense is going to tick up to 4, which makes him 4 wounds, defense 4, clash 4, and importantly, ignoring the first wound suffered every duel, which means that he can actually, like, you wouldn't want to fight probably still like a kitted out Nord character, or a kitted out Dweghom character, or a kitted out Old Dominion character, or a Fallen Divinity, or in fact most things that will attempt to duel you, but it means that you don't, like, you could fight, for example, the Eidolon, and probably be okay. And that's significant. It's expensive, and I like Vanguard clone Infiltrators. I'm choosing not to do it, but that is the advantage of running that kind of list. This duel, in that circumstance, would have posed no risk to me whatsoever. Now, Tom did do a clever thing over here on this flank, where he actually just blew these Force-Grown drones away with all of his Fireforged. He just put all of the shots into the Force-Grown drones, completely took them off the table, and what that meant is that I was kind of expecting to have that screen in play, and the T-Rex over here, the Ironclad Drake, not being a huge threat. Now, fortunately, the distance between the Ironclad Drake and my unit of my Warlord's unit of Brute drones was still large enough that Tom was forced to make a march charge. He could have gotten into the flank, because monsters are very flexible like that, but for obvious reasons he chose not to. He went into the front and was able to angle himself not to be in this water, but he's just doing impact attacks at that point, and the impact attacks of the Drake are good, but they're supplementary to it making melee attacks. And I'd already put some Brutes back at that point, and I had the Pheromancer give it -1 defense, and then the Vanguard clone shot it, and then the Marksman clone shot it, and I hit it with the remaining brute drones, and it died. It took all 3 of those things from memory, which is a lot of force, but it is enough force to put the big guy down. It's almost enough force to kill a Tauntaur, and that's saying something. So that means that then these brute drones were free to march 6 inches forward and then charge into these guys, lining up there, which among other things scores me the zone. So at the end of this round, I've got 2 zones again, and this is the fulcrum. This is the tipping point. Not only does the stuff I have left, like I have healing in my list, I have good healing in my list. When these fights start happening, like Fireforged versus brute drones under normal circumstances is surprisingly winnable for the Fireforged, because their defense and resolve is so good. But when the brute drones regenerate 4, they're just going to heal off all of the chip damage and win eventually, even if it takes till the heat death of the universe. And so because of that, like this is the point of the game at which things are concluded. If the Stryx had not managed to engage the Thanes, then what is quite likely is that Thanes would have killed these brute drones and eventually made this push towards this zone. I have some confidence I could hold them up for at least a couple of turns, but they would make it onto this zone eventually. And if the Ironclad Drake had been able to shatter the brute drones, I would still probably have been able to kill it. In fact, I'd probably be in a relatively similar situation here. But the existence of these brute drones reconstituting back up to full over the course of the rest of the game means that I now have enough force that this whole fight is going to be relatively straightforward for me. So not only do I tick over a significant number of points this round by dominating both of these zones, but I have finally set the attritional preconditions to win the game. So we have the final picture here, and we can see basically what is happening. These Vanguard clone infiltrators are going to spend the rest of the game shooting and destroying this objective. These brute drones have moved forward and engaged the Fireforged. Again, I don't really care about the fact that I've only got 1 model in contact. I can get into combat over the course of the rest of the game, but I am engaging them, they're no longer shooting, and they are not ever going to beat these brute drones thanks to regeneration. Same deal over here, we're going to slowly whittle away these Fireforged. We have Pheromancers in very aggressive positions, which are enabling me to put -1 defense on things that are relevant. We have broken through this Sorcerer's Regiment and then reformed these guys to face towards the Thane. The Thanes have cleared off the Stryx, but I'm now facing him down with like enough stuff that I could potentially even kill these Thanes if it came to it, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to come to it. There's not enough force left. I can fight here until the end of time scoring points, and I can hold Tom off. Not necessarily to the end of the game. I would imagine that the Thanes could potentially make it over to here if they didn't get jumped by the Force-grown drones, but it's just going to be challenging them for them to fight their way through everything. So we call the game there. It's not really important to math out the points that get scored because we're only playing 2 rounds today, and I've won both of them. But this was definitely much more difficult in terms of the game compared to the game against City-States. I wouldn't call this necessarily a worst case scenario. I've had 1 game with this list against a not quite on meta, but quite close Woodrune list, and they definitely scare me. I think there are a number of things that make Spires good against Woodrune, and a number of things that make that matchup fragile. If you are a Woodrune or a Spires player, I would be very interested in your comments about that matchup and how you find it. But I feel comfortable. I feel very comfortable against Old Dominion. Maybe a really, really good, well-played Fallen Divinity list, I think would probably cause some trouble, just because a well-played Fallen Divinity list is very good. I've played this kind of list against newer Fallen Divinity players, and it has been like watching a child try to fight their dad, but an experienced player I think would do much, much better because the Fallen Divinity is that kind of thing. I'm scared about Woodrune. I think full Goblin mode 100 Kingdoms and Ashen Dawn that's kind of a meta gremlin at the moment as well, but I think I can deal with them to an extent. It kind of depends. I can probably deal with 1 Ashen Dawn regiment. If I have to fight 10 stands, it might be a struggle. But otherwise, this kind of combined arms Dweghom list in this kind of scenario is definitely one of the list's larger threats. And we saw that. We saw that in this game, where like the middle of the game, ultimately I came through it okay, but there were positions of extreme fragility there. And that is the price you pay when you run this kind of a list. It is all lights and mediums, right? It's got nothing heavy as like the end game, the finishing blow. It doesn't have, for example, a highborn lineage highborn with a big unit of incarnate sentinels, right? It's not trying to do anything like that. It's trying to front load everything. And when you front load everything, you have certain advantages and certain disadvantages. And the disadvantages is that your whole army is defense 2 or 3 and crumples. And you make up for that by having a crumple zone, and that's what the Stryx and the drones and everything are for. So it is colossally different to playing Old Dominion, where Old Dominion is everything is kind of good, but it's only good late in the game, and you're slow and you're fighting your way. Old Dominion, the first 3 turns are like Vietnam, and then the rest of the game, if you get through the mid game in particular, you're good. You get that efficiency of your heavies, and everything in Old Dominion gets more powerful as the game progresses, etc. Just got to get there, so you have this early game stress. As Spires, in the early game, ha 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 ha, you're a genius, and then your opponent's heavies begin to arrive, and you better have set the conditions for your victory, because if you haven't, it's going to be rough. And that contrast is proving to be very, very interesting. I'm enjoying this a lot. This will probably be the last battle reports I do with this list, because I need to tinker and practice, etc. But I will try and run other Spires lists as I get things painted or play games. Otherwise, if you enjoyed what I do, you can support me via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, I will see you next time.